So welcome to Diana's Tea Time conversation about girls. We're gonna continue reading this book. I hope you've enjoyed the other segment, if you were able to get through it. I hope you have a coffee with you or something, some sort of beverage to accompany your study. I have my nice cafe caleta with cinnamon, honey, espresso, and brandy. Okay, so where were we? Okay, so where we left it last time is that we said to see clearly, to identify the situation of women, learn the causes, be able to argue about it. We must get out of the rut of using the vague notions of superiority, inferiority, and equality, because what does that mean? Nobody knows what it means. And we all kind of have the same values in the way that we all, men, women, everybody, agree that we all should be equal. But the thing is, that doesn't mean anything. So we need to talk about specific terms. So we were saying that these terms that have distorted discussions have to be discarded in order to continue. Many of us have never felt our femaleness to be a difficulty or an obstacle. And this is true. I speak with so many women, including myself, and we love our femininity. This very detachment makes it possible to hope our attitude will be objective. Yet we know the feminine world more intimately than men because our roots are in it. We grasp more immediately what the fact of being female means for a human being. We care more about knowing it. Obviously, because we are women. What precise opportunities have been given us and which ones have been denied? What destiny awaits our younger sisters? Which direction should we point them to? It is striking that most feminine literature today is driven by an attempt at lucidity more than by a will to make demands. And I think this is really nice of us, that we're not thinking of demanding, we're thinking of clarity. At least I am thinking of clarity. I know that a lot of superficial arguments can be seen as just asking for demands, but often these arguments, they don't get any respect anyway, and anybody with an ounce of intelligence can recognize that they don't have a point. So they're kind of irrelevant. It is no doubt impossible to approach any human problem without partiality. Even the way of asking the questions, of adopting perspectives, presupposes hierarchies of interests. All characteristics comprise values. Even a so-called objective description is set against an ethical background. We cannot really know what the word happiness means. So it doesn't make sense to talk about our happiness. We have to try to be objective. The perspective that I have adopted, that Simone de Beauvoir has adopted in what she's writing, is one of existentialist morality. So this is a little bit complex. I don't really want to get into it, but what it basically means, it's about justifying your existence, feeling like you have a purpose, being clear about what your direction is. What singularly defines the situation of woman is that being, like all humans, an autonomous, free human, she discovers and chooses herself in a world where men force her to assume herself as other. An attempt is made to freeze her as an object. Women's drama lies in this conflict between the fundamental claim of every subject, which always posits itself as essential, that is, we, because it's ourselves, we believe that we are essential, but at the same time, we live in a world that constantly tells us through customs, through principles, through laws, that we are inessential. How, in the feminine condition, can a human being accomplish herself? What paths are open to her? In focusing on the individual's possibilities, we will define these possibilities not in terms of happiness, but in terms of freedom. So instead of talking about how happy we are, we're going to talk about how free we are. How many choices do we actually have? What are really our options? So we're going to demonstrate how feminine reality has been constituted, why the woman has been defined as the other. Now, because this is a book of extracts, the only two parts that it contains is the introduction and chapter 14, which is kind of like the conclusive chapter of the first book. So after this introduction, this was all the introduction until now, I'm gonna go into chapter 14, which is called The Independent Woman. And because this is a specific chapter from now on, you will see that there's a bit more explanation. It's not quite so concise, not so much about firm quotes and more about explaining or discussing. So from here onwards, we're going to start explaining in a little more depth, a little more relaxed, all of the concepts that we have gone through. Women's liberties remain abstract if there is no corresponding economic autonomy. The kept woman, wife or mistress, is not freed from the male just because she can vote. She remains a vassal, imprisoned in her condition. And this is what we've said before, that the fact that we can explicitly all agree that we want to be equal doesn't immediately translate in actions. Work alone can guarantee her concrete freedom. The system based on her dependence collapses as soon as she ceases to be a parasite. The curse on the woman vassal is that she's not allowed to do anything. So she stubbornly pursues the impossible quest for being through narcissism, love, or religion. When she is productive and active, she regains her transcendence. She affirms herself concretely as subject in her projects. She senses her responsibility. This is really interesting because nowadays, this is a little bit dated, granted, obviously because it's the 40s and not a lot of women worked back then. But nowadays, a lot of women work, and still I can see, maybe especially in young girls where they don't work yet, and you can see immediately that she's pursuing her sense of self through narcissism, doing all the kind of stuff that classically women have been praised to do. In the quest of finding who you are, what you're supposed to be doing as a woman, it can be very confusing because you are told to be this beautiful, magical being. So you can really get caught up on that, and so many women have made a career on that. Just being a woman, we have made it into a full-time career because traditionally we didn't have a different objective. So being a woman has become a big enterprise for us. And this is something that we have partly created. In those times, it was even more exaggerated because not every woman would enjoy having a job, something to work for. So she just focused on being a woman. But then she gets to an interesting point, and that is, work today is not freedom. Today, the majority of workers are exploited. And you know what? I think this is still the case, except for those people who manage to work for themselves or who have their own businesses. In the corporate world, most workers are still exploited. The world has always belonged to men and still retains the form they have imprinted on it. That's very important because even if women manage to get into this workforce, the thing is, it has always belonged to men, and they are the ones that have constructed it the way it is. So often it's very uncomfortable for women, just physically. It's not made for us. Stuff around the world is not made for us. Bathrooms are not made for us. There's no space for us to do the kind of stuff that we do as women, to leave our stuff. Everything, architecture in itself, and even more in offices and places like that. If women were the ones to have created them, they would look very different. So we're already behind because we're joining something that belongs to someone else. Without a doubt, they are economically independent only within an economically oppressed class. And besides, the tasks carried out in a factory or in the office do not free them from household chores. This is still partly true, even though today we can get a cleaning lady, but it's still traditionally very linked to womanhood to be able to take care of the house, and we feel that responsibility. If this was not the case, we would have responded quite differently. If us women workers would become part of a world that would be our world, that we would proudly and happily participate in building, then we would behave much differently. In today's world and in today's work, most working women do not escape the traditional feminine world. So what's happening today is that this work that we have now begun doing, it hasn't freed us from our feminine situation, our chores, everything that we are supposed to be doing as women. So it's just something on top. And that is still absolutely true. So what has happened is that women are kept really, really busy because we need to be doing both things. We need to be doing all the traditional female stuff, and now we also need to be in the workforce doing all the things that men used to do. As women deprived of leisure time and inheriting a tradition of submissiveness, it's understandable that women are just beginning to develop their political and social awareness. That is understandable because we have just been busy with other things. We haven't been participating in the ruling of the world. It's also understandable that a shop girl should not want to give up the advantages of having a male to lean on, because we don't get the same benefits than males. It's understandable that we will want to lean on to them, at least for a while or whenever we need it. It's almost irresistible for a young woman to be part of a privileged caste when she can do so simply by surrendering her body. She's doomed to have love affairs because her wages are minimal for the very high standard of living society demands of her. This is a really, really good point, and I feel like this affects us nowadays so strongly, and this is a source of a lot of misunderstanding and of a lot of discussion, and it's a theme that's a little bit taboo because people still don't want to accept it. But this is true, and I'm gonna read it again. It's almost irresistible, the temptation for a young woman to be part of a privileged caste when she can do so simply by surrendering her body. She is doomed to have love affairs because her wages are minimal for the very high standard of living that society demands of her. Without decent living accommodation or clothes, all amusement and even love will be refused to her. This is still true. Men have a lot of time to develop themselves, to go through the career, to get rich, and then they kind of start their lives. For women, it's the other way around. We have to start our lives kind of from the top because we have most value when we are young. So we need to be accessing this standard of living and this beauty and all of this kind of like elegant clothes, all of this stuff. It's changing, but how much can it change really? Because biologically, we are doomed. So everything is refused to us if we don't belong up here immediately. We don't have 20 years of our lives to build a career. We just have to be there from the beginning. So it's just a characteristic of women. There's no answer to that. There's no solution. She needs to please men to succeed in her life as a woman, so she will accept help. And she should, in my opinion. She often does both. She frees herself from her lover through work, and she escapes work thanks to her lover. And that is exactly still what's happening today. However, there are quite a lot of privileged women today who have gained economic and social autonomy in their professions. It's interesting to study their situation closely because they are the subject of continuous debate. It's obvious that they are not comfortably settled in their new condition. A woman's commitment and focus on her profession depend on the context of her life as a whole. This is a particular characteristic of women that men don't suffer from. When she starts her adult life, she does not have the same past as a boy. Society does not see her with the same eyes, and she has a different perspective on the universe. Being a woman poses unique problems to an autonomous human being. The advantage that man enjoys and which manifests itself from childhood onwards is that his vocation as a human being in no way contradicts his destiny as a male. Man's social and spiritual successes endow him with virile prestige. He is not divided. However, for a woman to accomplish her femininity, she is required to be object. This is the huge distinction between men and women. And it's a really interesting couple of pages that's coming now. This is the conflict that singularly characterizes the situation of the woman. She refuses to confine herself to her role as female because she does not want to mutilate herself, but it would also be a mutilation to refuse her sex. Man is a sexed human being. Woman is only equal to a male if she is also a complete sexed human being. So the woman not only needs to do the work like the man, she also needs to be a woman. And what does being a woman entail? All of this other stuff. So there's just this huge conflict of interests. Misogynists have often reproached intellectual women for letting themselves go, but they also preach to them, if you want to be our equals, then stop wearing makeup and polishing your nails. This advice is absurd, and this advice is exactly still happening today. And this is why it's absurd. The idea of femininity is artificially defined by customs and fashion. It is imposed on every woman from the outside. I wrote a whole article about this, I believe, how being a girl is artificially created. This does not change the core of the problem. The individual, that is the woman, is not free to shape the idea of femininity at will. By not conforming, a woman devalues herself, because if we decide not to be a woman, then we don't have the value of a woman. All of these things that make us woman, we can't just deny them. That's not freedom for us either. That's another limitation. Everything is a specification. We have seen that homosexuality also constitutes a specification. Neutrality is impossible. There's no negative attitude that doesn't imply a positive. The adolescent girl, the teenage girl, she thinks that she can simply scorn convention, but by doing so, she's making a statement. She's creating a new situation involving consequences that she will have to assume. So it's not as easy as saying, I'm not going to do this, because by not doing that, you're doing something else. Neutrality is impossible. Whenever you ignore an established convention, you become a rebel. So now you are a rebel. A flamboyantly dressed woman is lying when she ingeniously claims that she is simply dressing to suit herself, and that is all. She knows perfectly well that suiting herself is an absurdity. If she does not want to look eccentric, she follows the rules. So you have options. You never can avoid everything. You have to choose one thing. Choosing defiance is a risky tactic. So whoever decides to be a rebel, that is, not to conform with what you're expected to do, is risky because you spend more energy and time. A woman who has no desire to shock, no intention to devalue herself socially, has to live her woman condition as a woman, as we have been assigned to be. But while conformity is quite natural for a man, because the world is made for him, everything is based on his needs as an autonomous and active individual. The woman who is herself also subject has to fit into a world that has doomed her to passivity. The servitude is even greater since women confined to the feminine sphere have magnified its importance. They have made dressing and housekeeping difficult arts. So us, in an attempt to make ourselves feel more important through the things that make us female, like dressing, like makeup, elegance, we have made these arts as difficult as possible. So we're only making it harder for ourselves. But it was only natural that we wanted to be the best we could be within the parameters that we have been given. The man barely has to care about his clothes. They're comfortable and adapted to his life. The woman, on the other hand, she knows that when people look at her, they do not distinguish her from her appearance. She is judged, respected, or desired in relation to how she looks. Her clothes were originally meant to doom her to impotence, and they still remain fragile. Heels wear down, light-colored blouses get dirty, pleats unpleat. She must still repair most of these accidents herself. Men will never volunteer to help her out. And it's true. We are meant to wear all these things which are so time-consuming to maintain, to be the best version of ourselves. So that is an added task that we have to do. And also we have to clean them ourselves, repair them ourselves. Of course, this is a bit dated, but it's kind of still the same. It's just an assumption that we're gonna go to the dry cleaners every day and get sorted. And now we can't even ask for help because now we're professional women, so we just gotta cover it. We can't even talk about it. It's seen so petty to talk about it. Of course, I need to talk about it because this is what it's about. But most women day to day, it's embarrassing to talk about it. It's like you shouldn't even give it a second thought. But the fact is, this is a job. And trust me, if men were doing this stuff, they would be talking about it. She will have second thoughts about straining her budget for work that she can do herself. Hairdos, makeup, new dresses, they're already expensive enough. It's true. It's just so financially disturbing to be a woman. There's always a stocking to mend, a blouse to wash, a skirt to iron. The woman who earns a good living will spare herself these chores. Like now, we have cleaning ladies or people who help us. But she will be held to a higher standard of elegance, and she will waste time on shopping and dress fittings and such. Still completely relevant. It's true, we waste most of our time in this stuff. Most of our free time, because this is considered to be some sort of, not a task, but not a hobby. It's just, it exists in this plane that is not meant to be seen. It doesn't count as anything. Tradition also demands that the woman pay attention to her home. However, public opinion is not the only concern that makes her devote so much time and care to her looks and home. She wants to feel like a real woman for her own personal satisfaction. Another really good point, that we are not only doing this for others, we're doing this for ourselves because we want to feel like real women. She only succeeds in accepting herself from the perspective of both the present and the past by combining the life she has made for herself with the destiny prepared for her by her mother, childhood games, and fantasies. She has cultivated narcissistic dreams. She wants to show off, to charm, because this is what we've been raised to do, and this is what we want to do. It's how we feel like women. She wants to live both like a man and like a woman. Her workload and her fatigue are multiplied as a result. Still exactly what's happening nowadays. We need to be both women and men now. The independent woman will suffer from an inferiority complex as a female. She does not have as much free time for beauty care as the flirt, whose only preoccupation is to seduce. She will never be more than an amateur in the elegance department. So the woman who devotes her time to working and building a career, she will never be as good as a seductress who all she does is take care of herself. And it's interesting what's happening lately with this, because there's so many women who are models or influencers, and what they do the most is just take care of themselves, and then we are all comparing ourselves to those women. And it's hard because it takes a lot of time. It's another job, and we try to do both of those jobs to a professional standard. Nowadays, we all have to be professionals in the art of taking care of ourselves. And now also with plastic surgery, we have to just be kept young magically. So that's another thing that a lot of women invest time on, researching, and operations, surgeries. It costs money, you know. The standard we are held to is just so high. The more the intellectual woman fears failure, this is a really good point. The more the intellectual woman fears failure, the more zealously she will try. She overdoes it, like a little girl, with the flowers, the frills, the loud materials. She carries it too far. She acts overtly casual, impulsive. She looks like those actors who, failing to feel the emotion that would relax certain muscles, purposely contract antagonistic ones instead. Thus, the intelligent woman, wishing to appear uninhibited, stiffens instead. And this is just such an intelligent way of talking about this. She senses this, and it irritates her. So the more we try as intelligent women to not have this image, you know, it's just all such a mind fuck and such a contradiction. The more that we try, the more that we're stiff, and we can't really have the nonchalance that the man has because we have all these other things in our head. As soon as she feels awkward, she gets fed up with her servility, and she tries to take revenge. Defiance irritates men more than it wins them over. If men were content to love a peer instead of a slave, as indeed some men do, who are without arrogance or inferiority complex, then women would be far less obsessed with their femininity. They would become more natural and simple. And they would easily rediscover themselves as women, which after all they are. The fact is that men are beginning to come to terms with the new condition of women. No longer feeling condemned a priori, women feel more at ease. Today, the working woman does not neglect her femininity, nor does she lose her sexual attraction. This success, already a step towards equality, remains nonetheless incomplete. It is still much harder for a woman than for a man to have the type of relationship she would like with the other sex. Many obstacles stand in the way of her sex and love life. Sexually and emotionally, most wives and mistresses are radically frustrated. It's more obvious with the independent woman because she has chosen not resignation, but combat. A woman who works hard, needs, like the man, not only to satisfy her physical desires, but also to experience the relaxation and diversion provided by enjoyable sexual adventures. I love how she speaks of this. There's still some environments where it's not concretely recognized that she should have this freedom, although I think nowadays it's kind of recognized now. But it's still, they say here that she risks compromising her reputation and career, and this also kind of happens, you know, the idea of the slut isn't going anywhere. The more she has succeeded in making her mark socially, the more willingly will people close their eyes. But she is severely scrutinized, especially in the provinces, and this is still absolutely true. Even in the most favorable circumstances, her situation is not the same as the man's. Differences stem from both tradition and the problems posed by her particular nature of feminine sexuality. The man can easily engage in casual sex that at least calms his physical needs and is good for his morale. The woman does not attain relief as mechanically as a man. Most women wouldn't consider this solution favorable. The risk of venereal disease is more serious for her. She's never completely covered against the threat of becoming pregnant. I want to add that birth control is horrific for a woman's health. I have myself suffered greatly, I mean, I'm talking fatally, with birth control. Birth control is extremely dangerous. It can fuck your hormones up, and if your hormones are fucked up, you're dead. Just let me say that. It's not the same for the woman who lets a man into her house. Obviously, for, you know, aggression, violence is pretty common. Women must usually be older to dissociate eroticism from sentiment so crudely, because in feminine adolescence, this connection is so deep. Throughout our childhood and teenage years, we dream of this love dynamic, and it's not so easy to get out of it. Even just for that, it would be difficult for us to disassociate the two. Besides, there is an element of deception that they are more aware of than men. Let's suppose for a minute that women would use a whore, a paying, how do you say it in, a gigolo. There is still an element of deception that they are more aware of than men. The paying client is an instrument used by the partner. Virile arrogance hides these ambiguities, and the man lies to himself. The woman is more easily humiliated, more susceptible, and also more lucid. She will not find it generally satisfying to buy a man. It's true. We just don't care about that as much. For most women, and also some men, it's a question not only of satisfying these desires, but of maintaining their dignity as human beings while satisfying them. There's a conversation here, very interesting, on sexual dynamics, which I'm finding it hard to explain, and I don't want to read all of it, but I'm going to read you some of it and hope that you get it. I'll try to explain it. So, in the way that we have sex as women and men, this relationship between us is like a circus act, which works better for the man. Next, the situation is so different for men and for women, and it's so complex, especially for women. I will just read you this page. When the male gets sexual satisfaction from the woman, or when he satisfies her, He puts himself as the unique subject, imperious victor, generous donor. She wants to affirm reciprocally that she submits her partner to her pleasure and covers him with her gifts. When she convinces the man of her worth, either by the benefits she promises him or by relying on his courtesy, she persuades herself that she is satisfying him. There is a beneficial conviction. She can solicit him without feeling humiliated, since she claims she is acting out of generosity. So we as women, we like to feel that we are being generous with the man by giving him sex. So that's how we convince ourselves that we are, worth it, and we are not humiliated by the fact that the man has achieved to have sex with us. The woman who traps the man likes to imagine herself giving, but the woman who gives herself wants it understood that she takes. So if you are the one giving yourself, you want the man to know that you are taking something from him. So it's easier if there is a sort of, often an economic reward. Like in marriages, when a woman gives herself, it's often because she's getting financial stability. Most males are fiercely jealous of their role. They want to awaken a personal sexual response in the woman, not to be selected to satisfy her need in its generality. And this is so true. If they are chosen, they feel exploited. A man wants to conquer. He doesn't want it to be given to him, and he also doesn't want to be the chosen one. He wants to be the one who comes and takes. That's the dynamic. The woman can only take when she is prey. She must become a passive thing, a promise of submission. If she succeeds, she will think that she has willingly performed this magic conjuration, and she will see herself become subject again. So she will feel that importance again if by being passive, she feels like she has turned it on and made the male fall for her. But by acting in this way, like an object, she runs the risk of being turned into a fixed and useless object. And that is the conflicts that we have nowadays. We want to be one thing, but then if we are that one thing that man wants us to be, then we are completely replaceable. The woman can only win by losing. She remains lost. Because for the man to win, he has to take us. And if we are taken, even though we convince ourselves that we have won, we're actually kind of losing. And if we're not, we're also losing. So it's just a lose-lose situation. We are always the prey. Even when seduction succeeds, victory remains ambiguous. Because according to public opinion, it is the man who conquers, who has the women. She is represented as pure passivity. She is a slut, open for business, ready and willing. She is a utensil. She is fascinated by the male who picks her like a fruit. This is so true. If she is not this, she is seen as craving to devour male sperm. Either way, she's never simply free. In France especially, this is funny, the free woman and the easy woman are stubbornly confused, as the idea of easy implies an absence of resistance and control, a lack, the very negation of freedom. In America, a freedom is recognized in women's sexual activity, which is very favorable to her. And I have noticed that in America, it's much nicer for women having sex, and it's just, there's a different vibe entirely. Very often, men considers the bed as the terrain for asserting his aggressive superiority. He wants to take and not receive, not exchange, but ravish. And a lot of women really like this. And I include myself in that group, but I realize what that means. He seeks to possess the woman beyond that which she gives him. He demands that her consent be a defeat. And this is one of the reasons why I find the question of consent such a difficult one to argue and to decide how to tackle, because the whole point often of sex is that there's this violence where the man takes you. And of course it has to be consensual, but it is a violence and you can't change your mind afterwards, which you sometimes would, but it's just unfair. If she admits her pleasure, she is acknowledging her submission. The woman faces the male as an adversary. She is far less well armed in this battle than he. First of all, he has physical force. It is easier for him to impose his desires. The woman who refuses passivity breaks the spell that brings her sexual satisfaction. If she mimics domination in her attitudes and movements, she fails to reach a climax. So what we're saying here is that if you refuse to be this passive object because you want to be the one that dominates, that's not actually how you naturally function as a woman. That's not how you get pleasure. So if you do that, it will be a good, you're just acting, basically. It doesn't really work for you. You're just doing it so that the male sees you as more imposing. And I see a lot of girls faking it like this. Just they feel like they are stronger by acting like men, but we are not men, we are women. And the way we get satisfaction is not the way men get it. So it's a bit pointless to do that. And I think it's a bad habit, because then men are like, this so often happens to me. Men want to watch me doing stuff to myself, and they think that the way I do stuff to myself when I'm alone is kind of the way they do it, and it's not like that at all. And there's just nothing to show. At least I can't show them what they think that they're gonna see, and they are completely just clueless about how sexual relationships for us work, because there's so many girls pretending that they're different. So please, can girls stop pretending that we have sex like males? Because then males think that that's the way it naturally is, and then we all have to start faking it, and it's just such a pain in the ass. Let me back up. Okay. There is a road that seems much less thorny for the woman, that of masochism. So if you are a masochist as a woman, it seems easier, because that seems to be the way that you naturally work. However, we will see. She still has to feel truly dominated, and this is the problem. And it's not easy for a woman who lives daily among men to believe in the unconditional supremacy of males. When the woman begins to doubt men's superiority, their claims can only diminish her esteem for them. In bed, at moments where the man feels he is most fiercely male, the very fact of his miming virility makes him look infantile to knowing eyes. She wants to interact with an adult who is living a real moment of his life, not a little boy fooling himself. The masochistic woman is particularly disappointed because a maternal, exasperated, or indulgent complaisance is not the abdication she dreams of. Either she herself will have to make meaningless games, pretending to be dominated, or she will run after men considered superior. So especially for the masochistic women, we need the man to be superior, but like truly superior, not just faking it. And we know when the man is faking it. Because otherwise, if we don't feel like this domination is real, then what's the point? Paradoxically, it is harder for a woman than for a man to recognize an individual of the opposite sex as her equal, precisely because the male caste enjoys superiority. Men can hold many individual women in affectionate esteem. A woman is easy to love. She fascinates, she amuses, at least for a little while, and then because her situation is limited and subordinate, all her qualities seem like conquests, while her errors are excusable. Because she's supposed to be inferior, we are excused a lot. The man does not hold a woman responsible for not being very intelligent. And we women try to take advantage of that, especially nowadays, I think. It's one of the benefits of being a woman, honestly, is that you can relax and not try to impress people all the time, because that's fine, being a woman. It's also kind of sad. She's a victim, he thinks, often rightly, of her situation. One can grant her a great deal because she is nothing definite in particular. This is interesting, because the woman as a definition is so vague, it's very easy to imprint your fantasies on her. This lack is what will cause the lover to grow tired of her quickly. For the same reason, because she isn't anything particular, and certainly nothing of lasting value, because it's all about just how beautiful we are. Men could just replace us, get tired of one, go to another. They were only interested in the visual anyway, so he's not losing anything. He feels superficial tenderness for her. It is far less easy to show friendship for a man for what he is made himself to be. He has no excuse. He's responsible for his behavior, his ideas. So for us, it's more difficult to like men. And this explains a lot, because I find it so hard to find a man that I like, and I speak with women all the time, and we just can't find men that we like. And she has a point in this book that a woman is just so vague, and the only thing she kind of has to be is pretty for her to be great. Whereas man, you need so much from a man. He needs to have built a life around him, and he needs to build a lot for us to take interest. Even ready to compromise, the woman has trouble adopting a tolerant attitude. So true. For the man does not offer her a great paradise of childhood. She meets him in this world that is common to both of them, and he brings only himself. He does not inspire dreams. If he does not prove interesting, he becomes bothersome. So we women, we need the man to be very interesting, otherwise it's just a pain in the ass, because he's so serious. Only very young men allow themselves to appear adorned by the marvelous. One can seek mystery and promise in them.